The winter had lasted 300 years, and no one remembered what spring looked like anymore. Lyra pressed her mittened hands against the frost-covered window of her tiny cottage at the edge of the Silverpine Pack territory, watching the endless snow fall in thick, suffocating curtains. The other wolves had long since stopped questioning why the seasons never changed, why the sun barely rose above the horizon, why the cold seeped into their bones no matter how many fires they built. It was simply the way things were, the way things had always been, for as long as anyone could remember. The elders spoke of a time before the eternal winter, but their stories were dismissed as fairy tales, pleasant fantasies to distract from the harsh reality of their frozen existence. Lyra pulled her threadbare cloak tighter around her shoulders and turned away from the window. As an Omega without a pack bond, without family, without anyone to vouch for her worth, she existed in the margins of wolf society. The Silverpine Pack tolerated her presence because she had a gift for healing, for finding the rare winter herbs that still grew in sheltered places, for brewing tinctures that eased the constant ache of cold, weakened bodies. But tolerance was not acceptance. She was allowed to live on the outskirts, allowed to sell her remedies at the market. But she was never invited to pack gatherings, never included in the warmth of communal hunts or celebrations. She was useful, nothing more. The knock on her door came just after sunset, sharp and impatient. Lyra opened it to find Beta Marcus standing on her threshold, his expression carved from ice that had nothing to do with the weather. He was Alpha Roderick's second in command, a wolf who had made his disdain for Omegas abundantly clear throughout his life. The fact that he was here, at her home, meant something was desperately wrong. Marcus didn't waste time on pleasantries. He thrust a leather pouch into her hands, the coins inside, clinking with the promise of more wealth than she usually saw in a month. His voice was clipped, businesslike, deliberately avoiding her eyes, as though looking at an Omega directly might somehow diminish him. He told her that Alpha Roderick's daughter had fallen ill with frost fever, the sickness that turned blood to ice in the veins, and the pack healer had already tried everything in his repertoire without success. They needed the glacier root, the rarest of all winter herbs, which only grew along the shores of Glacier Lake. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. Glacier Lake, the cursed lake, the place where no wolf willingly ventured, where the ice never fully froze and never fully melted, where strange lights danced beneath the surface on moonless nights. The place where, according to legend, the ancient Alpha King Theron had been sealed 3 centuries ago after being convicted of unspeakable crimes against his own people. Of course, no one actually believed those old stories. Anymore. The lake was simply dangerous, its ice unstable, its shores treacherous. Wolves who went there sometimes didn't come back, victims of thin ice or hidden crevasses. Nothing supernatural about it at all. But still, there was something about that place that made even the bravest warriors hesitate. Marcus must have seen the fear flicker across her face because his lip curled in contempt. He reminded her that she was being paid handsomely, that this was her chance to prove her value to the pack, that perhaps if she succeeded, Alpha Roderick might consider granting her a formal place in the pack hierarchy instead of leaving her to exist in this perpetual limbo. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the frozen air between them. Refuse, and she would lose even the tenuous tolerance she currently enjoyed. Refuse, and she might find herself cast out entirely, left to face the eternal winter alone, without even the cold comfort of proximity to the pack. She took the pouch. She agreed. What choice did she have? Marcus nodded curtly and disappeared into the swirling snow, leaving Lyra alone with her racing heart and the growing dread in her stomach. She spent the rest of the night preparing for the journey, gathering her tools, packing dried meat and her warmest furs, trying not to think about the stories her grandmother had told her before she died, stories about the Alpha King who slept beneath the ice, waiting for the one who would wake him and break the curse that held the kingdom in winter's grip. Just stories, Lyra told herself. Just old tales to frighten children and give meaning to meaningless suffering. The journey to Glacier Lake took 2 days of hard travel through snowdrifts that reached her waist and winds that howled like tortured spirits. Lyra traveled alone, as she did everything, her wolf form better suited to the journey than her human body, but still struggling against the relentless cold. When she finally crested the ridge that overlooked the lake, she stopped dead in her tracks, her wolf instincts screaming warnings that her rational mind tried desperately to ignore. The lake stretched before her like a massive mirror of dark ice, its surface smooth and black as obsidian, reflecting nothing, absorbing all light that touched it. The trees around its shores were twisted and bent, as though they had tried to flee and been frozen in place. The air itself felt different here, heavy with something that made her wolf whine anxiously in the back of her mind. If you're enjoying this story, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more supernatural romance tales that will keep you captivated until the very end. Lyra shifted back to her human form, her breath forming clouds of white vapor in the frigid air, and carefully made her way down to the shore. The glacier root grew in the narrow band of earth where the ice met the land, its silver-blue leaves distinct even under the coating of snow. She found several healthy plants and began the delicate work of harvesting their roots without killing them, her fingers growing numb despite her thick gloves. She was so focused on her task, so relieved to have found what she needed without incident, that she didn't notice the ice beginning to crack behind her. She didn't hear the low groan of shifting frozen water until it was too late. The sound that finally caught her attention was like the world breaking in half, a deep, resonant crack that seemed to come from the very heart of the lake. Lyra spun around just in time to see a massive fissure racing across the ice toward the shore, jagged and hungry, swallowing everything in its path. She tried to run, but her foot caught on an exposed root, and she fell forward, hard, her knee cracking against a stone. Pain exploded up her leg. She scrambled to get up, but the ice was already beneath her, the ground having disappeared into the rapidly expanding web of cracks. She felt herself sliding backward, felt the horrible sensation of solid earth giving way to the terrible nothing of open water. The cold when she hit the lake was beyond anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't just cold, it was the absence of warmth, the negation of life itself, a cold that reached inside her chest and tried to stop her heart. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only sink down into the black water as her limbs refused to obey her desperate commands to swim. Her vision began to darken at the edges, consciousness slipping away like sand through fingers. This was how she would die, alone and unmissed. Another Omega who disappeared without anyone caring enough to ask why. Her grandmother's stories flickered through her fading thoughts. The king beneath the ice, the curse, the blood price, just stories. But then something changed. As the darkness closed in completely, as her lungs burned for air she couldn't reach, Lyra felt a pull in her chest, a sensation like a rope suddenly going taut, connecting her to something vast and ancient and angry that had been sleeping far below. Her blood, leaking from where she had scraped her hands on the ice, drifted down through the water in dark ribbons. And that blood, for reasons she couldn't understand, was calling to something that had been waiting for 300 years to be called. The water around her began to glow with an eerie blue light. Lyra felt massive hands close around her waist, felt herself being pulled not up toward the surface but down, deeper into the lake, toward the source of that light. She should have been terrified, should have fought, but she had no strength left. Her eyes fluttered open one last time, and through the murky water she saw him, a man, impossibly large, impossibly beautiful, impossibly alive in the depths where nothing should live. His eyes were molten gold, glowing in the darkness, fixed on her with an intensity that burned even through the freezing water. His hair was long and dark, floating around him like ink in water. His body was wrapped in chains of silver and ice that pulsed with a sickly, magical light, ancient bindings that had held him in place for centuries, and those chains were breaking, shattering link by link as her blood touched them, as though she carried the key to his prison in her very veins. Theron, some deep instinct whispered to her, the Alpha King, the cursed one. He's real. It's all real. And then consciousness left her completely. And she knew, nothing but darkness and cold. When Lyra woke, she was alive, which was the first surprise. The second surprise was that she was warm. The third surprise, and the one that sent her heart racing with genuine terror, was that she was wrapped in furs inside an ancient stone structure she didn't recognize. And there was a man sitting across the room watching her with those same burning gold eyes she had seen beneath the water. He was even more imposing out of the lake, easily 7 feet tall, with shoulders that spoke of raw power barely contained. He wore clothes from another era, leathers and furs that had somehow survived their centuries underwater, and his presence filled the entire space with an alpha dominance so strong it made her omega instincts scream, conflicting messages to submit, to run, to bare her throat, to fight. His voice, when he finally spoke, was rough from disuse but deeper than thunder, resonant with power that made the stone walls seem to vibrate. He told her his name, as though she might not know it, as though the entire kingdom hadn't been built on the foundation of his supposed crimes. Theron Blackfrost, Alpha King of the Northern Realm, betrayed by those he trusted most, and sealed beneath the ice for 300 years for murders he didn't commit. He asked her name, asked what year it was, asked why she carried the blood of the old ones, the ancient royal line that was supposed to have been extinguished completely when his kingdom fell. Lyra's mind reeled. She managed to tell him her name, managed to stammer out the year, but she had no answer for his question about her blood. She was nobody, she told him. An Omega without family or pack bonds, a healer who lived on charity and suffered contempt. There was nothing special about her blood, nothing royal, nothing ancient. She was common as dirt and twice as worthless, or so she had been told her entire life. Theron's laugh at her words was bitter and sharp as broken glass. He moved closer, and she could see the rage simmering beneath his controlled exterior. 3 centuries of fury at being imprisoned for crimes committed by others, 3 centuries of plotting revenge against those who had stolen everything from him. He explained, his voice cold with certainty, that her blood had broken his chains, that only blood of the old royal line could have done so, that she was living proof that the usurpers who took his throne had lied about destroying his entire bloodline. Someone had survived. Someone had hidden. And their descendants had been deliberately kept ignorant and powerless, scattered among the lower ranks of packs where they would never discover their true heritage. Lyra carried proof of conspiracy in her very veins, evidence that everything the current ruling family claimed about the past was built on lies and murder. She wasn't worthless. She was dangerous to them, which was precisely why she had been kept as an Omega, beneath notice, beneath consideration, barely allowed to exist at all. Lyra's hands were shaking as the implications crashed over her. If what he said was true, then her entire life had been a carefully constructed prison, her low status not a result of bad luck or lack of worth, but deliberate suppression. But she couldn't focus on that now, because there was a more immediate problem. Theron had been sealed beneath the ice for 300 years, and the curse that imprisoned him was tied to the eternal winter that gripped the land. By freeing him, had she made everything worse? Would the winter intensify? Would the kingdom freeze solid? Theron's expression darkened at her questions. He told her that the curse was not what she thought, that the eternal winter was not his doing, but the price the land paid for the injustice of his imprisonment, that nature itself had recoiled from the magnitude of the betrayal and locked the kingdom in ice as a reflection of the frozen mercy in the hearts of those who ruled. Breaking his chains was only the first step. To truly break the curse and restore the seasons, he needed to reclaim his throne, needed to expose the truth of what had happened 3 centuries ago, needed to restore justice to a kingdom that had been built on murder and lies. And he needed her, because her blood was the proof that would make even the most skeptical wolves question the official history. He also needed her for another reason, one that made his gold eyes glow with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with cold. The mate bond. He could feel it between them, that sacred connection that tied one wolf soul to another, ordained by the moon herself. Lyra was his fated mate, the one the universe had chosen for him across centuries of separation. Lyra's immediate response was to deny it, to reject the entire impossible situation. She couldn't be anyone's mate. Certainly not the mate of a legendary Alpha King who had been imprisoned for 300 years. She was nobody. She had nothing to offer him. No power, no resources, no skills beyond basic healing. This had to be a mistake, some strange magic of the curse confusing things. But even as she protested, she could feel it too. That pull in her chest. That sense of rightness when she looked at him despite how terrifying he was. That Omega instinct that recognized him as hers, in a way that transcended logic or reason. Theron's expression softened slightly, the first crack in his armor of rage she had seen. He moved to sit beside her, careful not to crowd her despite his size, and his voice lost some of its harsh edge. He told her that he understood her fear, that he knew he must seem like a monster from nightmares. 3 centuries of darkness clinging to him like a second skin. He had been noble once, he said, a good king who cared for his people and ruled with justice. But the years beneath the ice had changed him. The isolation, the rage, the helplessness had eaten away at the best parts of who he had been. He didn't know if he could be that person again. He didn't know if there was enough left of the king he had been to build something good, but he knew that she was his mate. And the mate bond was sacred, unbreakable. The one pure thing in a world of lies and betrayal. He asked her very quietly if she could feel it too, if she could feel the way her wolf recognized his, the way her soul reached for his, despite all the logical reasons she should run screaming in the opposite direction. Lyra wanted to lie. She wanted to deny it, but she had been lied to her entire life. Her very existence built on deception she was only beginning to understand. And she found she didn't have it in her to add more lies to the pile. Yes, she whispered. She could feel it. The bond was there, impossible to ignore. A thread of gold connecting her heart to his, across all the years, and pain and darkness. She didn't want it, didn't know what to do with it, but she couldn't deny it existed. Leave a comment below telling us what you think Lyra should do. Should she trust the ancient Alpha King? Or is she walking into a trap even more dangerous than the cursed lake? Theron released a breath he seemed to have been holding for centuries. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and took her hand in his. His touch was warm, impossibly warm for someone who had spent 300 years at the bottom of a frozen lake, and the moment their skin made contact, Lyra felt the mate bond flare to life between them like lightning striking the earth. It was overwhelming, a rush of emotion and sensation and belonging that made her gasp. She could feel his relief, his desperate hope, his bone-deep loneliness, all tangled together with darker emotions like rage and grief, and an almost frightening hunger for revenge. She jerked her hand back, and the connection muted but didn't break. She could still feel him there, at the edge of her consciousness, a presence that would never fully leave her now that the bond had been acknowledged. Theron didn't try to touch her again, but his eyes held a fierce satisfaction. He explained that they needed to move carefully, that the current ruling family, the Silverpines, were the descendants of his most trusted advisor, the one who had orchestrated his downfall and taken the throne in the chaos that followed. Alpha Roderick, who ruled the Silverpine Pack now, was the great-great-great-grandson of the original traitor. The Yikes. Silverpines had spent 3 centuries consolidating power, rewriting history, eliminating anyone who might challenge their version of events. They would kill Lyra the moment they learned what her blood contained. They would do everything in their power to keep Theron from ever reaching the capital, from ever telling his side of the story. But Theron had advantages they didn't know about. 300 years beneath the ice had given him time to think, to plan, to reach out through the curse with his alpha consciousness and observe the kingdom that continued on without him. He knew things about the Silverpine family that they thought were buried forever. He knew where they had hidden evidence of their crimes. He knew which packs were dissatisfied with Silverpine rule, which alphas chafed under policies that benefited the ruling family while leaving other packs to struggle. He had a map to revolution in his mind, carefully constructed over centuries of enforced stillness. All he lacked was the ability to act. Now, with Lyra and her royal blood as living proof of Silverpine lies, with the mate bond giving him a personal stake in building a better future rather than simply burning down the present. He had everything he needed to take back what was stolen from him. Lyra listened to his plans with growing horror. He was talking about war, about tearing down the entire structure of pack governance, about exposing secrets that would shake the kingdom to its foundations. People would die. The realm would descend into chaos. And he seemed perfectly comfortable with that outcome, his voice cold and clinical as he outlined strategies for destabilizing Silverpine alliances and turning pack against pack. This was not the noble king of legend. This was something darker, something that had been forged in isolation and rage into a weapon pointed at everything the current kingdom represented. Lyra found her voice and asked him directly if he cared at all about the innocent wolves who would be caught in the crossfire of his vengeance, the families who would be destroyed, the omegas and pups who would suffer when the careful stability of pack society collapsed into violence. Theron's expression went very still, and for a long moment, he just looked at her, something complicated moving behind his gold eyes. Then he asked her, his voice soft but cutting, what she thought had happened to the innocent wolves when he was betrayed, when the Silverpines murdered his true mate in front of him before sealing him away, when they systematically hunted down everyone loyal to his rule and killed them or drove them into hiding. He asked her what she thought happened to all the omegas and children who were related to his bloodline, the ones whose very existence was a threat to the lie the Silverpines built their kingdom on. He asked her if she really believed the current peace was worth preserving, or if it was just the peace of the powerful standing on the necks of the weak, the kind of peace that had kept her trapped as a barely tolerated outcast her entire life. The words hit Lyra like physical blows, because she couldn't argue with them. The Silverpine Pack, the kingdom as it currently existed, had not been kind to her. Had not been kind to any Omega who didn't have family connections or powerful bonds to protect them. She existed at the mercy of wolves who saw her as useful at best, and contemptible at worst. But that didn't mean she wanted to watch the world burn. Didn't mean she was comfortable with becoming a symbol for a war she didn't fully understand. She told Theron that she needed time, that she couldn't make decisions about kingdom-shaking revelations and revolutionary plots when she had barely processed the fact that she apparently had royal blood and was mated to an ancient king who had just emerged from a 300-year imprisonment. Could they please just slow down for one moment and breathe? Theron studied her for a long moment, and some of the cold calculation left his expression. He nodded slowly and told her that she was right, that he was pushing too hard too fast, that centuries of planning had made him forget how to exist in human time, rather than the endless stretch of years beneath the ice. They would take time. He would teach her about her heritage, about the old royal line, and what her blood meant. He would show her the evidence of Silverpine crimes that he had uncovered. He would let her make her own decisions about what role she wanted to play in the coming reckoning. But he asked her for one thing in return. Stay with him. Don't run back to the Silverpines. Don't try to return to the life she had known. Give them time to understand each other, to explore the mate bond, to figure out what they could build together from the ruins of everything they had both lost. Lyra knew she should say no. Every rational part of her brain screamed that staying with him was dangerous, that he was unstable and angry and perfectly capable of destroying everything in pursuit of vengeance. But the mate bond pulled at her, and beneath the rage and darkness in him, she could feel something else. Loneliness, grief, a desperate need to be seen as something other than a monster or a weapon. She understood that feeling. She had lived her entire life being seen as less than she was, dismissed and discarded, and despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty, she wanted to know him, wanted to understand the man beneath the legend, wanted to see if there was a way forward that didn't end in fire and blood. So she agreed. She would stay, at least for now. She would learn about her heritage and his history. She would give them both a chance to figure out what they were to each other, beyond the mate bond that fate had imposed on them. The ancient structure where Theron had brought her turned out to be one of many hidden safe houses he had maintained before his imprisonment. Places only he knew about, protected by magic that had somehow survived 3 centuries without maintenance. Over the following days and weeks, Theron proved to be an unexpectedly patient teacher. He showed Lyra ancient texts that outlined the history of the old royal line, bloodlines that went back to the very first wolves who had been blessed by the moon herself with the ability to shift between human and wolf form. He explained that the old royals had been custodians of powerful magic, able to command the elements, speak to the land itself, draw on forces that modern wolves had forgotten existed. That power ran dormant in Lyra's blood, suppressed by generations of deliberate ignorance but not destroyed. It could be awakened, could be trained, could make her strong enough to defend herself against anyone who might try to silence her. The training was exhausting, both physically and emotionally. Theron pushed her to access abilities she didn't know she had, to feel the magic in her blood and bend it to her will. There were days when Lyra wanted to quit, when the frustration of failing over and over again made her want to walk away from the entire impossible situation. But Theron never let her give up. He was demanding, sometimes harsh in his assessments, but he was also there every time she fell, pulling her back to her feet, showing her again and again how to channel her energy, how to trust her instincts. And slowly, painfully, she began to feel it. The magic, the power, the connection to something vast and ancient that lived in her bones. The first time she successfully called fire to her hands, Theron's fierce pride in her was almost overwhelming through the mate bond. The first time she spoke to the wind, and it answered, shaping itself to her will. She saw something in his eyes that looked almost like hope. They were building something between them, something fragile and new, made of shared training sessions and quiet evenings by the fire where he told her stories of the kingdom as it had been before his imprisonment. And she told him about her life in the margins of pack society. They were learning to be comfortable with each other, learning that the mate bond was not just about destiny and inevitability, but about choice, about choosing each day to be vulnerable with each other, to trust each other despite all the reasons they shouldn't. But the outside world would not wait forever for them to figure themselves out. News reached them through Theron's network of contacts, wolves he had recruited over the centuries through dreams and visions, that Alpha Roderick had put out a bounty for information about Lyra. She had disappeared, and the Silver Pines wanted her found. They were telling people she had stolen valuable pack resources, that she was dangerous, that anyone who saw her should report her location immediately. Theron's expression went dangerously cold when he heard that news. They were afraid, he said. Something had tipped them off to the possibility that she was more than she appeared, and they were moving to eliminate her before she could become a real threat. They needed to act faster than Theron had wanted. He had hoped for more time to train Lyra, to prepare her for what was coming, but events were accelerating beyond his control. He told her they needed to go to the Ironwood Pack, one of the oldest and most traditional packs in the realm, led by an alpha who had no love for the Silver Pines. Alpha Fenris. Ironwood was old enough to remember stories his grandfather told about the time before the Eternal Winter, old enough to have heard whispers that the official history wasn't quite as settled as the Silver Pines wanted everyone to believe. If anyone would listen to their story and give them a chance to prove Lyra's heritage, it would be Fenris. The journey to Ironwood territory was dangerous. They had to travel through lands controlled by Silver Pine allies, staying off the main roads, moving, mostly at night. Theron was teaching Lyra to fight as they traveled, showing her how to use her smaller size and speed to her advantage, how to channel her magic into her physical movements, to make her stronger and faster than any normal Omega. The mate bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, no longer just a pull in her chest, but a constant awareness of his presence, his emotions, his thoughts sometimes bleeding through into her own mind. She could feel his determination, his carefully controlled rage, his growing attachment to her that went beyond the mate bond into something more personal and precious. One night, camped in a sheltered cave while a storm raged outside, Lyra finally asked him about his first mate, the one the Silver Pines had killed before sealing him away. Theron went very still, and for a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he began to speak, his voice rough with old grief. Her name had been Elena, and she had been his childhood friend before she became his mate. fierce and brave and kind in ways that made everyone who knew her better just by proximity. The Silverpines had used her as bait to trap him, had made him watch as they killed her, had told him it was his fault for being too trusting, too weak, too naive to see the betrayal coming. They had taken everything from him in one night: his mate, his kingdom, his freedom, his faith in the goodness of the world, and then they had sealed him away to suffer in isolation. For centuries, unable to die, unable to escape, unable to do anything but remember and rage, Lyra's heart broke for him as she listened, understanding now why he was so focused on vengeance, why he struggled to trust, why he sometimes looked at her like he was afraid she would disappear if he blinked. She moved closer to him, and for the first time, she initiated contact, taking his hand in hers and holding on tight. She told him that she was sorry for what had been done to him, that no one deserved that kind of cruelty, that Elena would have wanted him to survive and find happiness again, not spend eternity drowning in grief and rage. Theron's eyes were bright with unshed tears as he looked at her, and his voice was barely a whisper when he told her that he was afraid, that he didn't know how to protect her, didn't know how to keep from failing her the way he had failed Elena. Lyra cupped his face in her hands and made him look at her directly. She told him that she was not Elena, that she was not fragile or helpless, that he had spent weeks teaching her to be strong, and she had learned well. She told him that she chose him, chose to stand with him, not because the mate bond forced her to, but because she believed in what they could build together, believed that there was still enough good in him to balance the darkness. She told him that she was afraid too, but that fear was not a reason to give up, only a reason to be careful, to be smart, to watch out for each other. And then, because words were not enough for what she needed to express, she kissed him. The mate bond ignited between them like wildfire, and suddenly they were pulling at each other desperately, 300 years of loneliness and a lifetime of rejection meeting in the middle, finding completion in each other's touch. Theron kissed her like she was air and he had been drowning, like she was sunlight and he had lived in darkness forever, like she was the only real thing in a world of ghosts and lies. Lyra kissed him back with equal fervor, her omega finally finding her alpha, her soul recognizing its other half, when they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard. Theron rested his forehead against hers and told her in a voice rough with emotion that she was his, that he would burn down the entire kingdom before he let anyone take her from him, that she was the only thing in this world worth fighting for. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more supernatural romance stories that will make your heart race. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. The Ironwood Pack's territory was a stark contrast to the frozen wasteland that characterized most of the kingdom. Here, massive ancient trees still stood, their trunks wider than houses, their branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out the perpetual gray sky. There was snow here too, but it was softer somehow, less oppressive, as though the old magic in the trees pushed back against the curse of eternal winter. Alpha Fenris met them at the border with a contingent of warriors, his expression wary, but not immediately hostile. He was ancient by wolf standards, well into his 3rd century, his hair more silver than black, his face lined with the weight of long years and difficult decisions. His eyes, though, were sharp as blades, missing nothing as they assessed Theron and Lyra standing together. Fenris studied Theron for a long moment, and then something shifted in his expression, recognition dawning like sunrise. He was old enough, had heard enough stories from his grandfather to know the face of the lost Alpha King when he saw it. Fenris dropped to one knee, and every wolf with him followed suit, the gesture shocking in its sudden unified respect. Fenris spoke formally, addressing Theron by his full title, acknowledging him as the rightful king of the Northern Realm, sworn to serve and protect. Theron's expression was carefully controlled, but Lyra could feel his surprise and relief through the mate bond. This was the first time in 3 centuries that anyone had bent the knee to him. the first acknowledgement that his crown and his authority were not simply dissolved by treachery and time. But Fenris was also practical. He invited them into his great hall, into the warmth and safety of Ironwood hospitality, but he also made it clear that recognition was not the same as blind alliance. He needed to understand what had happened 3 centuries ago. Needed to see proof of Lyra's heritage, needed to know what Theron's plans were for reclaiming his throne. He was willing to listen, willing to consider, but he had his own pact to protect, and he would not lead them into war without being absolutely certain it was justified and winnable. Theron respected that caution. He had been betrayed by blind trust before, and had no intention of asking anyone else to repeat that mistake. In the great hall of Ironwood, surrounded by witnesses, Theron told his story. He spoke of the night of his betrayal, of how his most trusted advisor, Aldrich Silverpine, had come to him with news of an Omega rebellion in the Southern Territories, a revolt that needed the Alpha King's personal attention. Elena had begged him not to go, had said something felt wrong about the summons, but Theron had dismissed her concerns. He had been so sure of Aldrich's loyalty, so confident in his own ability to handle any threat. That certainty had been his downfall. The rebellion had been a trap, and when he rushed south with his elite guard, Aldrich's forces had moved on the capital, had taken Elena hostage, had used her as leverage to force Theron back. Theron's voice went hollow as he described returning to find Elena chained in the throne room, Aldrich's knife at her throat, half the court guard dead or turned traitor. Aldrich had laid out his terms with cold precision. Theron could abdicate peacefully, accept exile, and Elena would live. Or he could fight, and she would die before his eyes. Theron had been willing to give up everything to save her, had been ready to walk away from his crown, from his kingdom, from everything he had built if it meant she survived. But Aldrich had never intended to let either of them live. The moment Theron agreed to the terms, Aldrich had killed Elena anyway, had told Theron that his weakness, his willingness to put one Omega above the good of the kingdom, proved he was unfit to rule. Then Aldrich's mages had enacted a curse. They had been preparing for months, a binding that sealed Theron beneath the glacier lake, kept him alive but imprisoned, unable to die, unable to escape, unable to do anything but exist in frozen torment forever. The hall was silent when Theron finished speaking. The only sound the crackle of fire in the hearth. Fenris asked the questions that needed asking, poking holes in the story, looking for inconsistencies. But Theron had 300 years to remember every detail, to replay that night, endlessly in his mind. His answers were consistent, detailed, emotionally raw in a way that was impossible to fake. And then Lyra stepped forward and showed them her blood. Theron had taught her a small magic, a spell that would reveal the truth of bloodlines. Ancient royal magic that only those with power could perform. She cut her palm and spoke the words in the old language, and her blood glowed with silver light, the unmistakable signature of the old royal line. The assembled wolves gasped, and Fenris's expression shifted from cautious to convinced. The Silverpines had claimed that every member of the old royal line had been exterminated during the chaos of Theron's supposed crimes and downfall. But here was living proof that at least one branch of that bloodline had survived, had been hidden away and suppressed, but not destroyed. Lyra's very existence was evidence that the official history was built on lies. Fenris stood and declared before his pack that he believed Theron's claim, that he recognized the injustice that had been done, that Ironwood would stand with the true king in his quest to restore justice to the realm. Other packs would be harder to convince, he warned. The Silverpines had deep roots and many allies, but with Ironwood's support, and Lyra's blood as proof, they had the foundation for a real challenge to the current order. Over the following months, Theron and Lyra moved between packs, gathering allies, telling their story, showing proof of Lyra's heritage. It was slow, dangerous work. Twice they barely escaped assassination attempts by Silverpine agents. Once they had to fight their way out of a pack gathering when the local alpha decided to side with Roderick and tried to capture them for the bounty. But slowly, painfully, they built a coalition. Packs that had been marginalized under Silverpine rule, packs that remembered the old ways, and chafed under the current order's emphasis on alpha dominance and omega submission. Packs that simply hated injustice more than they feared change began to declare for Theron. And through it all, Lyra and Theron's bond deepened. They were partners now in every sense of the word, working together to plan strategy, to craft arguments, to defend each other when enemies struck. Lyra had grown into her power, no longer the timid Omega who had lived on the margins, but a force in her own right, her magic strong enough to hold off multiple attackers, her royal blood giving her authority that even alphas had to acknowledge. Theron watched her bloom into her strength with fierce pride and growing love. She was not Elena, and he had finally accepted that was a good thing. Elena had been gentle and kind, but she had not been a fighter, had not been prepared for the cruelty of those who wanted power at any cost. Lyra was different. Lyra was steel wrapped in softness, a blade hidden in silk. She could stand beside him in battle and hold her own, could challenge him when he let his rage, override his judgment, could remind him that justice and vengeance were not always the same thing. The confrontation with Alpha Roderick came on the spring equinox, 300 years exactly after the curse had been enacted. Theron's coalition of allied packs marched on the Silverpine capital, not as conquerors, but as petitioners demanding a formal challenge under the old laws. Roderick could not refuse without looking weak in front of the assembled packs, could not simply order them attacked without violating sacred pack law. So he accepted, agreed to hear Theron's claims before the full council of alphas, agreed to let the evidence be presented and judged. It was a trap, of course. Roderick had no intention of letting Theron live long enough to finish speaking, but Theron had lived long enough to learn caution, and he had seen this trap coming. In the great council chamber, before representatives from every pack in the kingdom, Theron presented his case. He spoke of his betrayal, of the curse, of the 300 years of imprisonment. He showed them the ancient documents he had retrieved from his hidden safe houses, records that contradicted the official Silverpine history. And then Lyra stepped forward and demonstrated her royal blood, let the silver light of old royal magic shine for all to see. The chamber erupted in chaos, alphas shouting questions and accusations, the carefully maintained order of Silverpine control cracking visibly. Roderick sat frozen on the throne, his face pale, clearly not having expected Theron to have this much proof, this much support. He tried to dismiss it all as tricks and lies, but his voice lacked conviction, and the assembled alphas could smell his fear. And then Roderick made his final, desperate move. He revealed that he had been holding the heirs of several allied packs hostage, children who had been guests at the capital under the guise of education and cultural exchange. He threatened to kill them all if Theron did not surrender immediately, if the allied packs did not disperse and abandon this foolish challenge. The hostage gambit was vicious and effective, and Theron watched his coalition begin to fracture as pack alphas were forced to choose between justice and the lives of their children. Roderick's smile was triumphant as he watched Theron's support collapse. He called for Theron to be arrested, for Lyra to be executed as a pretender, for order to be restored through whatever force was necessary. But Roderick had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated Lyra. While all eyes were on Theron at the front of the chamber, while Roderick gloated over his apparent victory, Lyra had been moving through the shadows, her magic hiding her presence from everyone in the room. She had learned from Theron's history, had understood that they needed to be prepared for exactly this kind of treachery. She had spent the past week secretly mapping the capital, finding where the hostages were held, recruiting sympathetic wolves within the Silverpine pack itself, wolves who were tired of serving a family built on lies and cruelty. And now, at the crucial moment, she revealed herself at Roderick's side, a knife of pure magical energy at his throat, while simultaneously her recruited allies appeared in the chamber with the hostages, alive and freed. The reversal was complete and devastating. Roderick had no more leverage, no more tricks, no more ways to avoid answering for his family's crimes. Theron's voice was cold as winter itself, as he demanded Roderick submit to judgment under the old laws. A trial by combat. Alpha against alpha. Winner takes the throne, and the loser submits to exile or death as the victor decides. Roderick had no choice but to accept. To refuse would be to admit cowardice in front of every pack in the kingdom, would be to lose all authority immediately. So he stood, called for the combat circle to be cleared, and faced Theron with hatred burning in his eyes. The fight was brutal, but not long. Roderick was strong, well-trained, vicious in his attacks. But Theron had spent 300 years beneath the ice with nothing to do but plan and remember and refine every skill he possessed. And he was fighting not just for a throne, but for his murdered mate, for the life he should have had, for Lyra and the future they could build together. He moved like violence given form, like retribution made flesh, and within minutes Roderick was on the ground, Theron's jaws at his throat. Submission or death, the only options remaining. Roderick chose submission, his voice broken and small as he yielded the throne and begged for mercy. Theron could have killed him. Every instinct screamed for vengeance, for the satisfaction of ending the bloodline that had destroyed everything he loved. But Lyra was there, her hand on his shoulder, her voice in his mind through their bond, reminding him that he was better than his worst impulses, that he had promised to build something better than what had come before. So Theron showed mercy, but it was the cold mercy of justice, rather than the warm mercy of forgiveness. Roderick and his closest conspirators were exiled, stripped of their pack bonds, sent into the frozen wilderness with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They would live, but they would live knowing they had lost everything, that their family's 300-year reign had ended in disgrace and defeat. The eternal winter broke that night. As Theron stood in the throne room, Lyra at his side, the mate bond blazing between them like a beacon, the first warm wind in 3 centuries blew through the open windows. Outside, wolves cried out in wonder as they felt heat on their faces for the first time in their lives, as the snow began to melt, as the curse that had held the kingdom in its grip finally released. The land itself was healing, responding to the restoration of justice, to the return of the rightful king. By morning, the first green shoots would be visible in the thawed earth, and within a month, spring would paint the kingdom in colors no living wolf had ever seen. The eternal winter was over, broken not by magic, but by the restoration of truth and the power of a love that had survived centuries of darkness. Theron's reign as the restored Alpha King was not easy. There were challenges from pack alphas who had benefited under Silverpine rule, resistance from wolves who feared change, constant work to rebuild, institutions that had been corrupted by centuries of lies. But Theron had Lyra beside him, her wisdom and compassion balancing his tendency toward harsh judgment, her royal blood and growing power giving her authority in her own right. Together they reformed the Omega laws, making suppression and marginalization illegal, creating protections for the vulnerable, building a kingdom where worth was measured by character and contribution, rather than accident of birth. It was the work of years, of decades, but it was good work, important work, the kind of legacy that would outlive them both. 5 years after Theron reclaimed his throne, on a warm summer evening that still felt miraculous to wolves who had only known endless winter, Lyra stood on the balcony of the palace and looked out over the kingdom she now called home. She could see the forests green and alive, the fields full of crops, the rivers running free without ice, all the beauty that had been locked away for so long now, restored. She felt Theron come up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his warmth surrounding her. She leaned back against him and placed her hands over his, over the swell of her belly where their first child grew. A pup who would be born into a kingdom of justice in spring, who would never know the eternal winter or the weight of oppression. Theron pressed a kiss to her temple and told her he loved her, his voice full of wonder, as though he still couldn't quite believe he was allowed to be this happy, that life had given him a second chance at everything he thought he had lost forever. Lyra turned in his arms and kissed him properly, pouring every ounce of her love and commitment into the gesture, showing him without words that he was hers, that she was his, that they had built something beautiful and lasting from the ruins of betrayal and loss. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling. She told him that she loved him too, that she was grateful every day for the curse that had brought them together, for the impossible series of events that had led her to fall through the ice and wake the Alpha King who had been sleeping beneath. The kingdom had its king. The curse was broken. The eternal winter was over, and two souls who had been lost and lonely had found each other across centuries of darkness, had chosen each other despite every reason not to, had built a love strong enough to thaw the frozen heart of a broken world. This was not the ending of their story, but the beginning of everything they would build together. A future bright with hope and green with the promise of endless springs to come. Thank you so much for watching this story. If you enjoyed this tale of ancient curses, fated mates, and love that transcends time itself, please give this video a like and let me know in the comments what you thought about Theron and Lyra's journey. Should we create more stories featuring their reign and the kingdom they're building together? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next supernatural romance adventure. Until next time, may you find your own fated mate, and may your own curses be broken by love.